The Third Side of the Coin, brought to you by XCaliber Coaching and Consulting.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast. This is our new business series called Next Steps for Success. And in this part three, business sustainability and impact, we will discuss what international agencies and serial entrepreneurs are thinking about during the times of building sustainable solutions during COVID-19 and beyond. So, Tim, I want to kick us off with two topics that I believe are related to where businesses are in terms of building new rules that might or might not be impactful or sustainable. Number one is going to be related to what the companies are doing from the human or employee impacting perspective. And the second one is of a much larger scale, and that's building environmental sustainable solutions. Just recently, read the article, and as you know, Christmas is coming up, and many states are again tightening down their lockdown rules, suggesting restrictions to travel, the number of people could actually gather at homes to celebrate Thanksgiving. And so, following the guidance and what the article titled "Your Boss Wants to Know What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" I've noticed that there are several organizations are trying to figure out the ways how they can empower employees to stay safe. Basically, some are approaching it from the perspective of maybe talking to the employees and maybe issuing some safety memorandums and asking them to stay at home based on the government guidelines. There's some underlying fears that once the holidays are over, then the employees can potentially bring the virus into the workplace. So they're basically trying to safeguard those workplaces. And many are issuing memos and creating videos reminding those employees about large scale gatherings. So there's really a concern about such intrusion, because usually it is the conversation, how do you present yourself in the workplace versus what is it that you are doing in your personal time. And so, to the second point that I've mentioned, on a larger scale, I also saw that the World Economic Forum had an article titled "Why COVID-19 is a Litmus Test for Corporate Attitudes to Sustainability." They state, the pandemic has proven the viability of the environmental, social, and governance agenda for both stakeholders and investors. So it appears that businesses have to focus on much more than just the human or employment rights issues, but also they started investing and putting more attention on the environmental contribution. So let's start with this based on those two factors that are happening first. Is it too early to talk about developing sustainability and impact in business because the pandemic is ramping up in different parts of the world? And secondly, what is your take on the challenge based on the new epidemic resurgence?
Thanks, Alex. I don't think there's ever too early a time to start on sustainability or space of impact. I think where we are at this stage in the world, we are playing catch up to a lot of things that is happening. Now, whether it's business or political reasons or social reasons, it is a global effort, and sustainability in the field is known more as global priority. I mean, there's many global priorities, and the United Nations has identified 17 sustainable development goals during the millennium, and that was developed as the Millennium Development Goals, and now it's known as the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainability is more than just not polluting. It's also about the environment that you work in. So it's about an ecosystem, and it's recognizing that everything functions on an ecosystem. So if you take a much broader view, then you come into what's known as biodiversity, which includes the environment.
What exactly do you mean when you say biodiversity? I mean, I understand we operate in as one ecosystem, whether we think that or not, because we impact each other. But talk to me a little bit more about biodiversity and business impact there.
Yep. So biodiversity, if you look at it from a scientific point of view, it means like there's multiple agents in that ecosystem. So when you look at, say, the forest or the ocean, there's so many different species, right? And they function differently. Likewise, if even in your own garden, you have weeds, you have flowering plants, you have fruiting trees or bushes, whatever. They all function together. And you've seen some agricultural practices is that it looks like a mess, but they actually help each other grow. So for example, if you plant pumpkin and string beans together, they feed off each other. So you actually have a very, very healthy harvest. So biodiversity and business refers back to really diversity and inclusion within the business sector. So within a business, you have different departments and you need different departments or teams, whatever you want to call them, to function effectively as a business. You can outsource it, but stuff that are strategic, you always bring it in-house. I think that's the best practice out there right now. So within biodiversity for a business, it means one looking within your organization on how you are engaging your employees. So how are ideas channeled up to you or being floated up to you? How is it being shared and how are people being brought along on that? On how the organization engages its external stakeholders or the community it operates in, then that's also part of the ecosystem. And that can range from funding or providing raffle prizes for your kindergarten raffle day, right up to providing meals for rough sleepers and also providing employment opportunities for individuals or training or job experience for kids that are transitioning from high school into college or whatever. So with that, it is taking it from a very big picture of we know that the world is so different and so multi-talented and funneling it down to what it means for the organization itself. Sustainability means long-term. It doesn't mean your quarterly reportings, your half-yearly reportings. It can mean your annual returns. So one example of what we were hearing from the European Impact Summit that we just hosted is that the mindset of a lot of business now is on the short term. One, because of the pandemic, because we don't know what's happening beyond 6 months, and the resurgence in the pandemic right now is again demonstrating to us that long-term planning is kind of disrupted in some ways. And because of the pressure on quarterly results that listed companies do, the focus then gets compressed and it becomes very, very short-term. When we start operating on a short-term basis, one, we're burning out our employees and we're losing sight of the greater impact organization has on the community.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because of the fact that the shorter term is quite drastic, right? It's traumatic. A lot of employees are put in the position where, depending on the type of the business, where they don't know whether they're going to have their basic needs met. Are they going to keep their job? I partner with a different organization that provides outsourcing services to the individuals. So the employer will offer the benefit of helping them with job search and other services such as resume writing and such. So, and what I am seeing is that majority of the time, it's not the medium-sized businesses that are able to provide that. And I think it's a wonderful benefit to have because those employees, yes, they got laid off, but they're probably going to be an extent more loyal, to return if the business needs to ramp up again, if they didn't find other opportunities or maybe over time. So demonstrating that loyalty to the employees, I think it's quite impactful. Similarly, I think what the organizations can do, and a lot of times it's being done in house, even before pandemic, if they have larger learning and development or leadership development budgets, they really need to put more attention on the employee development. When I mentioned that article in the beginning that talks about how bosses now are inquiring about what is it that you're going to be doing during Thanksgiving, it's not because they really want to genuinely know what it is you're gonna, where you're gonna spend time, but because of the fear that they're going to bring, illness potentially into the company and disrupt operations. Both are not wrong, but I think it's going to erode trust. So I think what you are referring to is giving the employers or the businesses a longer shelf life, if you will. If the organization is able to create such a culture that is clearly going to involve the employees in the being a part of building the sustainable future, then most likely the employees will be able to trust the employer more, even if they are potentially acting out of fear. I personally don't necessarily agree that the employees, again, depending on the country, but within the U.S. laws, it's definitely crossing the line. Sometimes there's a fine line what the employers can and cannot ask, but if there's that longer term solution, then it certainly is going to benefit them with building the employees' trust. That's just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, I think all the stuff you just raised, very valid. And we just have to unpack a very complex issue. First thing we need to look at is the company needs to understand that their responsibility goes far beyond just the business model itself. That's the general understanding. And the shift in the world mindset is moving from Milton Friedman's idea of profit first, that's the purpose of a business, now towards business for purpose or business as a force for good. What that means is holding business accountable that their impact or influence in the community goes way beyond just productions of goods and services. They impact on people's lives, people's livelihood, which is obvious as an employee, and also people's state of mind. What I think is very interesting you raised is businesses or companies giving opportunities of training for the employees. I think the laws in the US is quite strong, but other countries, the labor laws are not as strong or not as thorough as which we might see in the United States. Now, yes, companies can provide great training courses, right? But the problem with providing great training courses is that they don't provide the time to do it.
Yeah.
And I think companies need to set time aside for employees to take on further training. Now, when I say companies set aside time, it doesn't mean, yes, of course, let us know what you want to do and we'll make time for it. No. That at the end of the day, when they say learning should be self-driven, learning should be something that, you are curious about. If we told you to go and learn something, it will be less effective, blah, 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 blah. Yes, that is all valid. But at the same time, you need to create that safe space and the guaranteed space that exists. So go in the beginning and just say every Friday afternoon, that time is reserved purely for training. Whether you want to take training or not, that's up to you. But that time is reserved for training, and that's what we do. If we're able to say to our teams, every Monday and Friday, there are no team calls, why can't we say every Friday afternoon, or whatever day it is, that is specifically reserved for self-improvement or self-development? Can you imagine how that would change employees' attitude within the organization and the skill up in jobs, the lift, the one step up. That's such a small thing. And yes, it might be a cost to production as a business owner might see it. And leading into, are they overstepping their lines in what are you doing this or doing that? One of the things I think HR sometimes, or the business owner, if they don't have an HR arm, is thinking from how do I maintain business continuity?
Mm-hmm.
Because the last thing you want is someone who is needs to self-quarantine without knowing, comes back, and then the whole place needs to be shut down for 2 weeks, and it delays everything. Yes, from business owner's perspective, that's a risk, and I'm managing that risk. From an employee's perspective, it's sort of like, well, what the heck do you have to say about this? So immediately there is a clash of agendas. Now, that is only serving to highlight that the business model and the systems that we function in is broken. It doesn't work. Equally with businesses shifting from short-term quarterly results to just reporting maybe half-yearly or annual results, that's a huge mindset shift. And that's also a huge attitude shift, because there is a bit of adrenaline, you can't deny it, when quarterly results are being announced, because you've either way surpassed forecast, or you've underperformed, you've just met forecast, and there is an adrenaline rush for you. But if we only start focusing on that number, then everything else falls aside. And you start seeing that in a lot of organizations that has surveying in results and moving that number, and all they focus on is that number and not what are all the other contributing factors that made that number relevant or valid.
What you brought up about HR, about setting aside time and offering leadership opportunities to the employees, I really see that there's a huge gap that is not anything against HR, because that's my passion. That's what I like, looking at, people development, organizational development. But I think human resources departments would need to start looking at how to re-innovate themselves. They really need to start thinking how to keep the workforce that is talented in the position where they can continue delivering sustainable solutions. Because what's going on the market right now, many people, like you said, the labor laws in the US are probably one of the better ones in comparison to many countries. And I've lived in other countries, so I have something to compare to, and I agree with you. So the labor law protections is one thing, but how do we execute those people development strategies? That's going to also require sustainable type of solutions. And there's something new that needs to be happening here. When you walk into a large corporation, and I'm like even looking right now, either it's the leaders I'm working with or, the family members, I'm coming from the background of, working for large corporations. You're right, there's never time. So is it going to then involve the HR somehow to put together the proposals that are going to become profitable, but at the same time, keep the talent? Even though we have millions of people without jobs right now, you still want to keep those who are working for you, who are talented, who understand how your company works. So you build that culture of sustainability with them, bring them along. I mean, those are not new concepts, but I think something new needs to be done, because what we used to do before is not going to work the same now. Our budgets are different. We are, creating profits differently. The market is different. I mean, there's just so many changes that happened in the last 9 months that people development has to change somehow.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And people development, I guess that's the new term for HR.
Oh,
So
is it?
so people development is the most under-resourced department I know. And if your most valuable asset within an organization are your people, then why isn't there the same investment going into it? when we start looking at all the major companies across the world, how many people development officer or human resource officer is on the board? None. Well, I wouldn't say none. A very few. If people are the assets of an organization, then the same investment needs to be put in. Well, not the same, but greater investment needs to put in it. When I used to work for a bank, and the HR department they were working crazy hours. And it was just, I've never seen such an under-resourced organization. And you start to realize how certain things starts to break down, because if you don't get the right people in, then the wrong decisions get made. Or if you get the right people in and not enough support is given to them, then, again, it becomes a circle and becomes a self-feeding vicious cycle. So one, it is looking at turning the whole business model upside down. Well, it's not even turning the whole business model upside down. Since I started working, the big topics has always been talent acquisition and retention.
Right.
And to this day, it is still talent acquisition and retention. It means no one has addressed it. No one has addressed it effectively. When I look back at some of the organizations I've worked for, great training programs, self-driven, it's sitting there. But I need to question how many people actually access it and how many people actually complete it. Mm-hmm. So
and how many people actually use it and apply it in practice? That's the big difference. Yeah.
Yes. So with that as well, the other thing that's coming up that we started to see at European Impact Summit, and Melissa Fleming, who is the Deputy Director General for Communications for the UN, talked about compassion. So when I was briefing her, I said to her that, wow, you've really redefined how the UN's communicating, especially it's sort of from its sky blue and white website. It's now very rich. You've really brought it into the social media age. And she was quite happy about that. And I said, how the heck do you communicate to multi-generations, multi-ethnicities, multi-cultures, multi-disciplines and education, to get people all together to say, yes, we believe in this? And she said, that's a great question. It's all about compassion. How are you able to see from the other person's perspective and find what is the underlying thing? And that the underlying thing is that everyone wants to improve themselves. Who doesn't? Everyone wants to have a better life. Who doesn't? Everyone wants to avoid suffering. Who doesn't? And when you start looking at that, compassion, when you take the religious or spiritual things out of it, you realize it's just really how you want to treat other people and how people want to treat you back. And when you start infusing that into an organization, then you will see the changes that we talked about of why isn't happening begin to happen. When you need to legislate for these things to happen, then you know that the system isn't working or people are taking advantage of it.
That's brilliant. I think if some of the political world leaders, organizational leaders can just take the compassion as the ideology on board, so many problems would be resolved. Because then you're talking about looking at compassion of, number one, how you treat each other, right? Number two, how do those employees that are working for you actually help you grow? So they are looking at the business owner's point of view, and then altogether they can make a decision where they can invest their energy in contributing to the better world. It's so simple.
Yeah. It starts also from the top, and the top requires courage an incredible courage of, I'm not afraid of losing my job. I think there's very few politicians and leaders out there that are not afraid of losing the job. The moment you start getting attached to your job, then that's the moment you start putting up walls in order to support your own success rather than the success of the greater good. Now, when I start saying the success of the greater good within an organization, it means every employee. A happy employee means a functioning organization. And that's what Eric Yuan, CEO of Zoom, shared with us. I asked him, how was he able to scale from pre-COVID, say in January, there was only several 100,000 or maybe a million users, and bang, within 30 days, you had
Exploded.
hundreds of millions. Yeah, I said, I mean, did the system just go like that? And I said, but there needs to be people behind it making it work. And he said, it's this employees. He said, the philosophy and the practices he's done in Zoom is a happy employee is a great company. And he goes in great efforts to ensure that his employees are happy. Now, when the employee is happy, he or she is more willing to go the extra mile for you. And they were able to scale so quickly and so effectively because of just the goodwill and the way that the organization function is about creating happy employees. So it was great. It was because we were working on European time. The earliest we could get him was, I think, 8:30 or 9. No, it was 9 Pacific time. So we kept pushing for earlier because 9 Pacific time is sort of like late afternoon for Europe.
Right.
And what happened was he came back and he goes, no, I just can't do earlier than that because that's family time for me and I switch off. It's all family. He was like really setting his boundaries, which is great. And to give people the confidence that that's it. You hear a lot of that in organization, people saying set your boundaries, but how much it's practiced, I'm not sure. And if you do practice it, how much of it does the person feel that they will be supported in doing? I'm not sure as well. So
But
there's a lot of...
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So there's a lot of things when you start looking at what you were asking me earlier is, the biodiversity and what it means to an organization. It's just being able to see it's an ecosystem, that everything is interconnected, and to be able to see that everything's interconnected, that sense of compassion, that everyone is doing their best, allows you to then take that step back and then look at what does it mean on the other side, rather than me as the boss or as leader.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful example about the CEO of Zoom and setting the boundaries. I can go back to so many leaders back in my own career, and the couple stand out. I didn't ever mind working long hours for a greater cause. If I believed in purpose, it was easy for me. I would get involved, and sometimes at the cost of a family. And I was young and passionate, and I thought that this was it. This was just what I did. But I also realized later on that because of the fact that my own leaders actually were examples when I was younger, they were working with, at that time, there were like Blackberries, and they would not stop. I mean, literally sleeping with the phones on, waking up and responding to emails at any time. And then eventually, I believe that this was the great example because it was worship. This is what this person did. That person is the leader. You have to do it because then there's that fear. If I don't do it, even after I came to realize that, I need some boundaries. I need to spend more time on my personal development, my family, and so on. You're right. There's that fear. But if you as a leader are doing that, so I don't know how many practice that same type of approach, but I truly believe that if the leaders are able to set those boundaries, they're also going to yet again start building that trust, that mutual trust. You talk about compassion. Well, boundaries on your personal time are showing that you also value what I value. If you value your family or your personal development, then I value that too. And I start looking for commonalities. And I say, you know what, Mr. or Mrs. CEO or VP or whoever the leader is, depending on the title. I'm all for it. I can put in extra hours sometimes, but I also appreciate that you will recognize that when I need to be off on a holiday with my family, you're going to respect that time. So
Yes, it also takes from the follower to also enforce it. So the problem with global organization is it's very difficult to enforce. What you hear, and I'm not sure whether my North American colleagues ever hear, is that the outside of America, we always say, well, the Americans always say they're working late when it's 6 p.m. or they're working early because it's 7 a.m. But when you look back on colleagues outside of the United States, we're working 10, 1 a.m. as well.
well, you haven't met me before, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's besides you, but that's
yeah.
the impressions that a lot of non-US based employees have across all industries. So the what we need to start looking at is how are we able to function as globally while respecting everyone's boundaries. And this is goes into the second question of, with the rising second, third wave, fourth wave in some countries already, pandemic, what is going to happen? Well, there's the vaccine that everyone is talking about might put a slowdown to it and allow us to recalibrate and see how we go forward. And hopefully the vaccine will allow solidarity to start again within the world. Right now, there's no solidarity. Without any solidarity, there's no alignment. And without any alignment, how can you make a cohesive effort in fighting the pandemic? You see, the pandemic it doesn't discriminate. It's just everywhere. And if it's everywhere, then everyone needs to chip in at the same time. And when you chip in at the same time, it's easier to eliminate it rather than it seepage through other places.
As far as the business is concerned, Tim, you were bringing up just excellent opportunities for how businesses and the leaders could build those sustainable and innovative solutions. And there are three major themes that came up for me that I took notes here for from our conversation: compassion, courage, and boundaries. Tim, I definitely found it so useful, and thank you for sharing your views, and so is the world leaders' views that you've learned about us talking about the topics of how businesses can become sustainable and really use this opportunity of pandemic to try to reinvent their workforce development and human resources strategies. So next time we can talk more about compassion, courage, and boundaries as part of our business series and beyond. But if you did enjoy our discussion, please like and comment below. Subscribe to our channel, The Third Side of the Coin, on YouTube. To learn more about executive leadership and career coaching, resume writing, and organizational development services, go to www.excalibercoaching.com. And if you want to connect with Tim and I directly, please find us on LinkedIn. Thank you.